Hi everyone, I am Brittany of the Cosmic Lunar Soul. Welcome to my channel. If you're new, welcome back to all of my subscribers. Today I am bringing back an oldie but goodie, bone throwing. So my first video about my bones, which was, can you believe it, over 3 years ago, was just an overview, kind of introduction to the set, sample reading, stuff like that. And today I want to talk about what the positions of the bones really means, at least in how I do my readings, and hopefully it can help with you. Most beginners focus only on what each bone means, but the real magic happens when you get to see how they connect. So today, that's what I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you how to read the relationships between the bones and unlock deeper insight into your throws. I'm going to have timestamps in the bottom. Feel free to hop around. The way this is going to work is I'm going to do the sample throw, and then we're going to talk about things in segments. And you can see, like, in the description, the different topics that I'm going to go over. So what I'm going to do is turn it this way because I'm sitting this way here. And then just so you guys can see everything, I'll talk about it from left to right. All right. So we have a few different things that happened. I'm going to turn everything around. It was thrown from this way into this direction, and this guy fell off of the board. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit where we can look at these clusters. So we don't have very many. Let me zoom out just a little bit so you can see. So we kind of have this core cluster here, and we have this cluster, and then technically we have this here, and we have this here. Um, so this whole section that we're going to talk about first is going to be like proximity and clusters, and just where the bones sit, where the clusters sit in relationship to each other. Um, and then we'll kind of go into patterns and groupings within the clusters, and then talk about any isolated bones and stuff like that. And then we'll wrap it up with just understanding, providing context through the combinations. And a lot of it is intuitive. So I'll do my best to show you what I'm talking about. Actually, I'm going to zoom back out because I want this section to be where you look at the whole of the board. So I mentioned we kind of have this cluster here. We have this cluster here, but it's connected by this small cluster here. And then we have this disconnected cluster up here, and then this cluster over here. This guy here is sort of isolated off of this, but once we go into the next section and we talk about like the actual groupings, then I'll explain that a little bit more. And then when we get to the section about isolated bones, I'll talk about this guy. So one of the things you want to look for in clusters is the connection or disconnection between them. The details of the cluster will tell you why they're connected or not connected. So here, for example, we have a disconnect between this is our like anxiety bone, right? So there's a disconnect between our self, this is our self bone here, and the um, anxiety bone that I mentioned. And one of the things that's interesting is if this had been in the back, that'd be a good thing. But because it's in the front, it worries me that there are things on the horizon that you're anxious about, and that could eventually you might end up hitting like a roadblock kind of thing. So that's how I'd see this positionally in the front versus in the back, where the back, I said it's a good thing because it would insinuate that you're learning to move on from those really high anxiety situations, or learning how to manage your anxiety in a way that it doesn't feel like it's weighing you down anymore. So the tooth here is one of those bones. It's more like, think of it as like an adjective, right? So your noun here is anxiety, your adjective is like longevity, so long lasting anxieties. So as I'm talking, usually what I like to say is, what are things that you kind of feel like are impending that have been feeling that way for a while. And you have time between now and then. How can you mitigate that, for example? Like, how can you mitigate it being so impactful to you once you get to that point? This could be something like interviewing. Maybe you've always had a long standing struggle with interviewing. This could be a transitional period in people's lives, like maybe graduation or a move, and it's a little scary and you don't know how to handle it. So there are a lot of things this could be. This would be one of the things that I would actually identify as saying maybe we should do a deeper dive with a tarot reading. So let's look at these two clusters. So this is where the core of yourself is. This is where I tend to identify wherever the self bone is. Usually 9 times out of 10, I identify as present. So this is present tense. This is sort of past tense, things that have been behind you, but not so far behind that you are disconnected from it. And here, these three bones are not the most pleasant, especially all together. So this insinuates that this cluster has left bad vibes. You've has left a negative impact on you that you're still carrying with you right now. Here's another disconnected cluster that is still behind you, but also not really connected to anything. So generally, when these are also some like I'll call them my adjective bones. Sometimes I don't see them as necessarily being very important. I'll kind of mention them sometimes, sometimes I won't. It just depends. But usually what I do is I'll pull them off the board after I've kind of looked through everything just to clear things up because there's a lot of noise in general readings. And part of identifying the clusters is learning how to filter out the noise. Um, you usually end up doing that by getting a lot of feedback. If you do readings for yourself, you can identify what just doesn't feel like anything, what feels just like nothingness. And uh what can you just filter out. So now that we've talked about like the connections between the clusters, I want to zoom in a little bit more. We already talked about this. So I'm going to zoom in more so on this part so we can see this a little more closely. So we have this cluster back here. There's a few things. I'm going to use my handy dandy pointer so my sausage fingers are not in the frame. We have This is what I see as the beginning of the cluster. Like, imagine a circle. Maybe editor Brittany can put a circle around this for you. So we have here at the center of it relationships, and it feels like that must have been the crux of everything that was going on. The thing is, these individually don't necessarily seem bad, but this is the bone of like new perspective. This is about growth. This is another amplifying one that's just kind of it generally indicates some semblance of importance. This is about feeling beat down. This key is opportunity. This coin is finances. And then this can represent a few things. I usually ask my clients like what it is they do. It can just be general spirituality. It could be your deities. It could be your spirit guides. It could be your ancestors. So this is just something I tend to talk to. But overall, I just see it as sort of a spiritual thing. um, so the way that I would sum all of this up is this cluster looks like there felt like there were opportunities with friendships, maybe around money, maybe business, for example, or just, maybe you guys have some things you do online. It doesn't have to be anything truly official, like starting an LLC or anything, but you're using that as an opportunity to grow. And something happened here that just felt like it wasn't going well. And it was more of a burden than it was an opportunity. Um, but the growth here leading this way still shows that you ended up moving on from it. And it was probably because of that growth and just really being able to understand your position in this situation a little better. And then it leads to this. We have fears, we have disappointments, and we just have negative energy overall. What this feels like is like leaving the group to do your own thing. Or maybe it's kind of like the Beyonce and Destiny's Child thing where one person, maybe you in this case, it could have been anyone, kind of, you know, kicked it off and maybe went viral or something like that and left the group. And then the group just didn't do well. And there's some bad blood there. Um, between everyone. So this is our fear bone. I think that a lot of negativity around friendships can drive a lot of fear about how you're going to move on, how the friendships or circle will survive a situation like that. If we go over here. Okay, so this bone here is the bone of like flexibility, like being adaptable and being able to change, and its position can show how good or bad you are at that. This bone is another anxiety bone. This one's more like anxious around like change, whereas this one is more like a anxiety, stress, like almost a mental health kind of thing. Whereas like this one I see as physical health, and how they relate can change that. And then of course this is our self bone. So this has a direct line to the self. The good thing about this is you're the, let me start with the negative. I'll do the bad first. The bad thing about it is this flexibility bone is still pointed directly at the self bone, but the good thing is it's not actually on top of it like it could be. So it's like a sign of slowly but surely getting out of that. And so when whoops. Sorry. I'll try to put everything back. So when you're looking at these, I like to kind of hone in on things and then I'll look at the other things along with it. Just take things in baby steps. You don't have to tackle everything all at once. But yeah, so this is kind of a sign that you're starting to pull yourself out. It's always a great sign when the bone, your self bone, is on top of a pile versus underneath a pile. But being on that pile is still indicative of being involved in whatever that pile is about. Another thing here, we have this paw. This paw signifies a lot of hard work specifically. Um, like intentionally putting in work. So I feel like this has been a very intentional unpiling, I'll say. And then this is the bone of balance. So when this pops up, generally this is indicating that there's a need for balance or you found balance or something is helping with that. The dice I will sometimes move around. I like to see where they land because it helps me understand the proximity, and it'll make sense in a second. But like this one here, this guy is a timing of months. So 8 indicates it can either be the 8th month, so it could be August, or it can indicate in 8 months. It's one of the things it's a newer bone to my set, so I'm still kind of honing in on that. But um, it's either or. In some situations, it's more obvious, some it's not. Just is what it is. And then we have here, these two actually go together. So this is 66. This D, I guess 100 technically together. They are indicative of like the difficulty of a situation. 1 through 50 is more of an internal struggle. 51 through 100 is more of an external struggle. So 60 is on the lower end. So there's some like just, it's most likely an external thing that's going on that's weighing on you, which makes sense if it has to do with your friend group. And it doesn't seem like a difficult situation because it's on the lower end of the 51 through 100. Then this guy here is our stage of the event. Again, my dice are new, so I'm like feeling things out, and you guys are now part of that process. So this is 5. This is out of a D8. So this helps me gauge this a little bit, but the difference is that there can be different pieces of what you're working on that make up the whole. So that's why I feel like the stage can really be what is going on in that particular cluster, whereas this is like kind of the whole. But since these are so together, I think that it's more so the the I think they're connected. So 5 out of 8, you're over the halfway point of whatever, what you're dealing with. Um, so this probably makes sense that it's 8 months from now, right? What's October? Yeah. So it makes more sense that this probably is 8 months versus being August, but they're very close regardless. Down here, we have the friendship bone. So this is relationships, this is friendship. Relationships can be romantic or aromantic. It could be familial. This is the family bone, so it kind of tells me that they've been a good support for you and been helping you through that situation. And your friends being buried under here is kind of indicative that you're kind of keeping them close technically, but you're not connecting with them. They're almost part of the burdensome pile. This is an amplifier. It kind of the amplifiers are hard to explain. This represents strength overall. So to me as a reader, it just indicates that this is something that I want to talk about to you, or this indicates something that we probably have to uncover a little deeper using the tarot, which is actually what I would recommend in this case to understand the connection better with your friends. And like, for example, how can you better um rebuild your friendships, or what can you do to let go of some of the anxiety around your friendships, stuff like that. So that was the deep dive into the individual clusters. Let's talk about the isolated bones. So I mentioned that this guy was kind of on the outskirt, but it's a little different because these dice go together. So wherever they are, I tend to look at them as almost like a imaginary line going from one to the other. I don't remember where this one was, sorry, but just like an imaginary line. So it's like a blanket covering of this. But if it had been more like this and this, then it kind of tells me it's more so talking about this entire thing. So hopefully that makes sense with the dice. They are a little different in how I handle isolated bones. Um, so this guy is the one that of the fell off of the board during the throw. Generally, what that means to me is that it depends on the bone because it's a die. Uh, it's irrelevant. This is irrelevant to the situation. This is the elemental die. Sometimes I like to use the elements to see how they influence a situation, or how you can utilize the elements to better, get through a situation. But because this fell off the board, then it doesn't really matter. Um, it was a very bad example of like something falling off the board, but like let's say this fell off the board. I do look. This is again the spiritual bone. If it falls off during the throw, versus never coming out of the cup, out of the dish, I kind of see two different ways. Falling off kind of indicates, I would say, if it was this something that you're pushing away, or you're not focusing on, you're not prioritizing in the way that you should. But if it was something that was in the bowl and never threw, I would say it probably not relevant to my client. So it maybe spirituality is just like a passive, very, very passive thing. They're not actively involved in it. So it probably it doesn't need to throw. Because if this had been isolated, it could just mean that there's a disconnect between the client and their spirituality because of the struggles they're going through, and it would be a good idea to reconnect. This would be an example of wanting to do a deeper dive on how you could better build that connection or reconnection, um, what steps they can do, and or like how can tapping into their spirituality help with the situation. There are a lot of different questions that can pop up. Ultimately, it's up to the client. So, as I'm talking about this, you can see that there's a lot of intuition at play. The beauty about bone sets is, I mean, you're kind of the master of your own domain. You create your set. Okay, let me back up. Some sets do come with predetermined like meanings. Um, but in reality, you could just toss that if you wanted to and create your own meanings of the bones, and a lot of that is just intuitive. When I got my set, for example, um I didn't have any of the dice, and I didn't have these three guys. So I added them in because I felt like it was something missing. Um, Again, this is disappointment. This is balance. I didn't talk about this because it was isolated and I pulled it off. I felt like it was irrelevant. This is the truth bone. And then I didn't mention it, but this one is like, it's the opposite of this, where this one feels like you're beat down. This one feels like you're, exuberant and vibrant and like kind of tapping into that youthful side of yourself or high energy. So that's kind of how you know you go off of this. A part of building that confidence and intuition is um reflecting back on your own readings if you do them. So I recommend, for bone reading specifically, to absolutely take a picture, go through and actually circle the clusters, and then write what each cluster means, and then write down what the connectors or lack of connectors means for them. um and that could be how you kind of get into building up all of that, and then over time you can see how does that relate. um how does life, I guess, relate to your reading. So if you have been wanting to get into bone reading, I know it can see very intimidating, but just take it step by step. Your intuition grows with each reading, and so hopefully you learned a little bit from this video. Next time you throw your bones, you don't just read them one by one. Look for those relationships. Like I said, try circling the clusters, noting the distances, and just overall building that story. So comment below and let me know which segment of this was really helpful. Let me know if there's things that I should clarify on, or if it kind of spurs more comments. I really want to do more bone videos, but I sometimes struggle with what I should talk about. Um, so I love reading you guys' comments. And if you want to see more deep dives of bones and tarot and anything like that, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and that notification bell so you don't miss out on any future content. All right. Bye, guys.